All right, so in this video, we're going to take another look at Teams kind of administration topic, a governance topic, and that is sensitivity labels in Microsoft Teams. I have just stumbled across this recently, started using it recently, spent some time over the last month or so playing with it, configuring it, kind of figuring out how it works. Looking at it, it actually looks like it's been around since maybe late last year, about a year ago. If not that early this year, maybe March, April, it started coming out in preview. It appears that all of the functionality that is involved in this now is in GA. So let's take a look at sensitivity labels and what you can do with those when it comes to Microsoft Teams, Microsoft 365 groups, and SharePoint sites. If you like these topics, if you want to get more of these topics, don't forget to hit the like button below, subscribe to get alerted when new videos are posted out, tell others about the YouTube channel, share the goodness with others about some of these topics that you're learning about here. If you do have other topics you want to, feel free to comment down below or head over to our website. That's linked below as well, intelligent.com. Reach out to us there. Let us know what topics you want. So without further ado, let's dive into this topic. So sensitivity labels in Microsoft Teams allow you to label or categorize Microsoft Teams, Microsoft 365 groups, SharePoint sites in different ways and actually have limitations associated to what you can do with those in terms of, is it a private team or Microsoft 365 group, or is it a public Microsoft 365 group? Can this team or group or SharePoint site be shared with external users or not? One very important thing to take into account, though, when you're looking at these sensitivity labels is that these are container level sensitivity labels. So think of Teams, groups, SharePoint sites, if you don't have a ton of experience with them, as a container. It's a bucket of content. When you apply these labels, you're applying the labels to the bucket itself. It doesn't apply to everything inside of it. It doesn't apply to the documents, the files, whatever content you may add to the team, add to the SharePoint site, add to the Microsoft 365 group, is not going to inherit the sensitivity label that's applied to the team itself. You still will have to train users, work with users to apply sensitivity labels to the content, because certain content in the site may not even have that same sensitivity label or those same restrictions as the team itself or the site, the Microsoft 365 group. Just be aware that as you set these up, as you start using these, if you apply a sensitivity label to one of these containers, that label is not going to automatically trickle down or automatically be inherited by whatever content you add to that specific container. So how do we get this set up? The first thing you actually need to do is make some settings in Azure AD. If you're not aware, I'm still surprised of the number of people that don't fully realize this. If you have Microsoft 365, if you have Office 365, you have Azure AD. Under the covers, SharePoint sites, Microsoft 365 groups, Microsoft Teams are all driven by groups, a collection of users in Azure AD. So therefore, as you're applying these sensitivity labels, you do have to start in Azure AD. The first thing you need to do is, let's jump over here to the screen, is install the module. So I'm in Windows 10. I opened up PowerShell. Unfortunately, the Azure AD preview is not supported yet in macOS. So I need to go live in my Windows 10 environment to set this up. So we're going to install a module. And we do have to do the Azure AD preview module. So there is an Azure AD module, an Azure AD preview module. We need the Azure AD preview module for this. I always do this. I'm not as an admin. So let's just scope this to the current user so I don't have to relaunch my PowerShell as an administrator. This is going to go out grab that module, install it. I already have it out there, so it went pretty quick. Once you have that installed, you need to go ahead and connect to Azure AD. So let's go connect to our Azure AD environment. I have MFA enabled. I'm going to go ahead and log in as my user, which is also a global admin. Let's log in here. It is a worker school account. I will tap the appropriate number to connect. And now I am connected to Azure AD. So I can go start getting the group settings. I just copied and pasted this from the documentation. I will link to the documentation for all of this, so you can go grab these PowerShell commands as well down in the video description. So feel free to go grab all of these links out of there. You can copy and paste this PowerShell so you don't have to write it yourself. While you're down there near the bottom of the video, click that like button if you like writing PowerShell and you like these videos. We're going to get our settings from Azure AD. We're going to go get Azure AD directory settings, where our property and our display name is these group unified labels. This is going to be that prerequisite as well, that you do have your unified labels set up so that your Azure AD labels, your labels in Azure, match up with your Microsoft 365 labels. So let's go grab that setting a minute, and let's take a look at what that value is. In mine, I already had this set up, so it's actually going to show that my setting values in my enable Microsoft Identity Protection Labels value is set to true. By default, in your environment, this is actually going to be set to false. So this is why you will not see sensitivity labels starting out, that first setting that you need to make. So if this is set to false in your environment, just another command will go copy and paste, and we are going to grab that setting. We're going to grab the enable MIP labels value in that setting, set that to true. Once that is set to true, we can go ahead and save it. And really, to save it, we just do, instead of those get Azure AD directory settings, we do a set Azure AD directory settings. We grab the ID, and then we just grab the settings that we already updated with true, apply that, and just like that, everything's configured in Azure AD to start using sensitivity labels. The only other thing that needs to be done now is you actually need to go set up your sensitivity labels to synchronize to Azure AD. So this is a whole another set of instructions. Fortunately, it's just a single PowerShell commandlet. So I will link to that one down below as well. And this is done through the Security and Compliance Center in Windows PowerShell. And truth be told, Security and Compliance Center is just going out and connecting to your Exchange Online Management. So this is another one of those modules I already have installed. If you have not installed it yet, I will throw the commands up here, but it's going to be install module and Exchange Online Management. So the Exchange Online Management module is another one of those newer modules that is now in the PowerShell gallery. So we can go ahead and install this module. I did it once again where I didn't scope it to my current user. Let's scope this to scope current user. Go ahead and install this Exchange Online Management module. This is the module that you'll use to connect to the Security and Compliance Center. It's part of the Exchange Online Management module, but you don't connect to Exchange Online. So once that module is installed, if you're not getting the commands to, you may have to import it, where you can do an import module, exact same thing, Exchange Online Management module, that'll go pull it all in. To connect to the Security and Compliance Center, instead of what you may typically do with Exchange Online, where it's going to be connect to Exchange Online, this is rather going to be connect to IPPS session. And we'll go ahead and run that. Once again, it's going to pop up my dialog box so I can log in as my administrative user, grab that worker school account, put the number in once more. There we go. Now we're connected. It's going to go out and grab all those modules. What this is actually doing behind the scenes is just creating a remote PowerShell session to the Security and Compliance Center. That runs for a couple seconds, we are all connected. And now we can go out and sync everything up. And pay close attention. This one is super complicated. It is execute Azure AD label sync. All one line. Didn't even have to copy and paste it. EXEC, hit tab, auto completes it. Boom, run that. You're all set. That's going to go out and run that AD label sync. And now you are all set up to start using your sensitivity labels in Microsoft Teams, Office 365 groups, Microsoft 365 groups, and SharePoint sites. At this point in time, we're done with Windows 10. We're done with PowerShell. The rest of the configuration can all be done within various admin centers in terms of applying labels. We still have to set up some of these sensitivity labels that we can start using within our environment. So let's get rid of Windows 10 and let's go over to our Compliance Center. You can also do this from Security Center. This is within the information protection solution within the Compliance Center, within the Security Center with Microsoft 365. If you don't have this option over here, they've changed how some of this works. You head over to the catalog. From the solution catalog, you can go ahead and open it, then you can pin it, and that information protection will show up over here. Now that we have information protection set up, you can see I have a bunch of labels already. Let's go ahead and just create a new one so you can see how this works. So we'll create a new label, and we are just going to call this label our YouTube label. We will give it the same display name, and this description for users is YouTube classification for video. If you want a description for admins, you can do that. Scope. This is what is now lit up that you would not have had before. As you can see, you still have files and emails. This has always been there for protecting the content that is actually within those containers. Your SharePoint files, your Teams files, which again are really just SharePoint files, your emails. You also have now groups and sites, which is also going to apply to Teams, as under the covers, Teams is just built on top of one of those groups. Azure Purview, we'll get into all of that another time. So we are going to leave groups and sites selected now. Go ahead and click Next. These are some of those protection settings for files and emails. Again, nothing has changed here. This has always been there. We'll just leave that alone. Auto labeling, we're not going to worry about auto labeling. Groups and sites. This is where it starts getting interesting in terms of what you're allowed to do with those containers or what you can control in those containers. The first thing is those privacies and external access settings. So we're going to click to go ahead and control privacy and external access settings. And we also want to control device access and external sharing settings. This is just what's going to get defined in the next steps. So if we click Next, you'll see now we have both of these options. If we had only selected one of those, we only would have gotten the first one. Let's go back, select them both. Privacy and external access. This is going to be your privacy of your groups, of your teams, where when you may have created teams in the past, you see you have that option. Is this a private group? Is this a public group? Well, this is going to define it for you now based on sensitivity labels, not based on a user's clicking whatever one they want. This is going to say, if you choose the sensitivity label, it's going to be public. If you choose a different one, it's going to be private. Or if you do choose none, you can still leave that option up to the users themselves, where they can go in and pick which one they want. Let's go ahead and do public. And then external user access. Are we going to let those group owners add external users to their site? Or are we going to restrict it and say, nope, no external users allowed in this site. This is a public site within our company. So any of our employees, any users, contractors, whoever can get to it. But we are not going to allow those external users in. So let's go ahead and leave that one unchecked so that those external users can't get in as guests, and look at external sharing. The next couple ones we have here are control external sharing from labeled SharePoint sites. This is going to essentially say, I don't care what the site was configured as within your SharePoint Administration Center. SharePoint admin may have anyone. You may have opened it up to anonymous, but because the site got classified a certain way, we're going to actually override that setting and only allow people in our organization to access it. So this is another one of those where all of this has been configurable before. You could set all of these before, but now these sensitivity labels are actually going to define what these settings are, rather than leaving it up to the administrator or the users to define these settings. Also, access from unmanaged devices. This access for unmanaged devices has always been there. It's a part of conditional access. Your Azure AD, it was in security. I think now it's over in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. But this leverages conditional access, so you do have to have certain licensing, at least in place for this one especially, where you are licensed for conditional access. You have Azure AD Premium P1. You have one of those EMS licenses. But this essentially says if the sensitivity label is defined, we're only going to allow access to this site from the web browser. People can't sync it down to OneDrive. They can't download files out of SharePoint. They're only going to be able to access it via the browser window and not take any of those files offline, or just outright block access from unmanaged devices. So if you're sitting on a computer at a friend's house, you pick up a family member's computer, you go connect to your Office 365 environment and try to get to a site that is labeled in this way, you're going to your access is going to be just blocked altogether. So this is actually also applying that newer feature where it's not conditional access at the entire environment level, but it is that conditional access on a site-by-site level. So unmanaged devices, conditional access, this is what you're allowed to do on that specific site. So now we can go ahead and click next here. We're not going to worry about purview, finish, go ahead and create our label. And this will go create that new sensitivity label within our environment. We can go ahead and click done. Next, we do have to publish this label. So once it gets created here, we can refresh it. We now have our YouTube label at the bottom. You can see it applies to files, emails, sites, unified groups, purview. I have a bunch of other labels here I created a while ago that are still only files and emails. I did bump up a few of these already to be unified groups, SharePoint sites. To publish these out, you have to go into your label policies. You have a couple different options here. One, you can either go into an existing label policy and actually edit that policy and then add additional published labels to it. So you can see I have several in here. Or you can go create a brand new policy where in this case, we're just going to go create a new policy that only contains our YouTube label. We can go ahead and publish it out to all users, all sites, all groups. Policy settings, apply this label by default. We're not going to apply this by default to anything. If you do want to apply a certain label to all of your sites by default, maybe you want everything to be classified secure by default or confidential, and then you can always lessen requirements if you need to down the road. You can do that. Name and description. This is just going to be our YouTube demo policy. Review all of our settings. Submit it. This will go out and publish that policy now and publish that label for us to use within the various environments. This can also take some time to get published out. So for the purpose of this demo, we may not see the YouTube label yet. Give it some time to show up in the various places where you can go in and apply these labels. I have published some of these before, so we can go in and take a look at some of those and where some of those are used. Let's jump over to our Microsoft Teams environment to start. And this is my Teams environment. I'm logged in with one of my demo users. I'm going to go in and create a new team. We'll start and create one from scratch. And now you can see, instead of being able to choose that private or public and any of those additional settings, all I have is those sensitivity labels. I can choose one of those other ones I set up before. Internal, I let the user pick whether it's private or public. If we're doing client, those are all going to be public. If we go down to do partner, that's going to be private. So you can see how those restrictions are already coming into play we can do a YouTube partner team here, and we'll go ahead and start creating that new team. You'll also get the exact same thing if you would go in and create a new SharePoint site. I have SharePoint site creation blocked for normal users. So let's jump back over here. And if I would go to my SharePoint environment now, go to the Intelligent Admin SharePoint site, go ahead, active sites, create a new site, and we'll do a new team site, some site name. So we can go fill all this out. We can go into our advanced settings, and you'll see now I have those exact same sensitivity labels. I can choose a partner one again, and you'll see privacy settings now have changed where this is only going to be private. We can go click next. It'll go out and create that in SharePoint. So now I'm going to jump back to my Teams Admin Center, and we can see where these have started to get applied. So here's a list of all my teams in my Teams Admin Center, and you can see those sites that I've already started applying sensitivity labels to have that sensitivity label now in the site. So you'll also see one of these that I don't have it selected on. I can go select that demo site or demo team, edit this demo team, and go back into my settings here and apply a sensitivity label as well here, where this is a demo, and demos, it allows me to only have public. So it's going to be public, apply that, and go in and apply these sensitivity labels as well to teams that have already been created. SharePoint allows you to do the same thing. This SharePoint site's been created now. I could also go down here to one of my demo sites, and as I scroll over here, you'll see a lot of these have those various sensitivity labels already. They have none, partner, demo. I can select one that already has that sensitivity label on it. So if I go over to policies and edit that sensitivity label here, I have that option. One thing to take note of that I found is as you're going in and applying sensitivity labels to teams that are already created, that sensitivity label won't automatically trickle down to the SharePoint site that's associated with it. You do have to go assign that sensitivity label to both the team and the SharePoint site. However, if you're creating it brand new SharePoint site, brand new team, that sensitivity label gets applied to all the resources associated with that team when it gets created. So again, just another one of those little things to be aware of as you apply these, especially to sites and teams that have already been created. The last place you can do this as well is in your Azure AD portal. So if we would jump over to Azure AD, because remember at the beginning of the video, we said this is really an Azure AD functionality because it applies to those Office 365 groups. So I can jump over here to my groups, and let's just pick one of these. We'll go ahead and do this one and jump over to properties. This was actually a client I did some work with. Here in sensitivity label, I can drop this down, and you'll see YouTube has actually made it over to Azure AD. May not have made it over to Teams and SharePoint yet, but just like in all the other environments, I can go ahead and choose my sensitivity label, go ahead and save that sensitivity label, and now that'll be applied to that Microsoft 365 group as well in Azure AD. So that gives you an overview of sensitivity labels, how you can go start creating them, how you get your environment within Microsoft 365, Azure AD set up to leverage sensitivity labels, how you can go in and apply them to different resources. And we took a little bit of a look at how those settings affect the creation of teams, of SharePoint sites, applying them to Microsoft 365 groups. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. This helps you with your administration and governance of Microsoft Teams and helping to protect and secure that content within your Microsoft 365 environment. For now, continue to learn, enjoy Microsoft 365, and let us know if there are any other videos you would like us to create.